The mission to build the ultimate weapon is as old as war itself. Driven by a mix of strategic necessity and human curiosity, from the massive Ottoman cannons to the daunting Warwolf trebuchet, nations have historically thrown heaps of resources at creating war machines, some of which border on the bizarre. In the modern chapter of this arms race, China has stepped up as a major contender, though not all of its ventures have hit the mark. Enter the VN-20, China's latest roll of the dice in their ambitious aim to assert dominance over East Asia. Is this colossal machine a stroke of military genius or just a giant leap towards obsolescence? We're diving deep into the heart of China's military evolution, spotlighting its key infantry vehicles and the historical backdrop of its tensions with Taiwan to unravel the VN-20's origins, capabilities, and potential pitfalls. This video is more than a review of a new war machine. It's a peek into the future of warfare and a reflection on the motivations behind such massive military investments. But before we get to that, let's talk origin story. And this tank is filled with war, more war, and the death of a leader. At the end of the Second World War, China's nationalistic government fell flat under the weight of economic strain and public unrest. After a bloody civil war that lasted for 3 years, communist powers flooded the mainland territories and ended imperialism once and for all. Internally, the CCP attempted to hasten China's industrial development with bold but sometimes harmful programs, most disastrously the Great Leap Forward, a policy that led to the deaths of an estimated 20 million people. Some sources even cite up to 45 million. Looking over a politically fragmented China, Mao Zedong continued to make efforts to mobilize the country's disorganized military. The most notable of these would begin with the Parcel Island conflict with Vietnam. It was the PLA's first naval clash with a foreign country and a complex joint battle involving the PLA Navy, Marine Corps, PLA Air Force, and ground forces, as well as fishermen and militia. The operation, although helpful in the realm of propaganda, with the CCP citing victories over much larger vessels, also revealed to the world that China's military might was not found in their machinery. Like Russia, their greatest strength was how many people were at the government's disposal. However, it wouldn't be long before China would use artillery in modern conflicts. About 3 years after Mao's death, a self-defensive counterattack on Vietnam showed that China was making a great effort to enter the 20th century. The Chinese attack was conducted along 10 major corridors, primarily against Vietnam's cities of Lai Chau, Lao Cai, and Ha Giang in the western sector, and against Cao Bang and Lang Son in the eastern sector. Nearly every military region in China contributed forces, which included over 20 divisions, about 300,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and more than 1,500 artillery pieces. Although not a real victory by any means, China was beginning to exhibit its ability to summon immense strength against a foreign adversary. Again, not without setbacks. By the late 1980s, Chinese leadership started dumping massive sums of money into combined arms warfare. One of the major organizations to come out of these efforts was the Central Military Commission, or CMC, heading the People's Liberation Party, People's Armed Police, and the Militia of China. Their ancillary Ministry of National Defense, also known as the NDSTIC, was responsible for modernizing the Chinese military, but they struggled to achieve even the simplest goals due to their lack of authority. The only organization with real bureaucratic power was the General Staff Department. It included functionally organized sub-departments for artillery, armored units, engineering, operations, training, intelligence, mobilization, surveying, communications, quartermaster services, and political education works. From here, more departments were formed, making everything bloated and disorganized. Collaborating with allies, China became more like a glorified arms dealer, creating a hodgepodge of aircraft and infantry vehicles that were blatant copies of superior models. An example of this would be a joint fighter jet with Pakistan, the JF-17, which ended up being an inferior copy of the F-16. In recent years, China's defense spending only continues to increase. Upgrading their equipment and technologies is a central focus of China's military modernization campaign. From 2010 to 2017, China's annual spending on military equipment rose from $26.2 billion to $63.5 billion. However, when you take a closer look, quantity over quality seems to be the unofficial slogan of the Chinese military-industrial complex. Here's the problem: the Chinese military never seemed to stop the bleeding after the fall of the empire. When it comes to armored vehicles, they have been heavily reliant on two tactics: collaboration and outright theft. Before the Sino-Soviet split, they relied heavily on assistance from their northern neighbors. The Soviet Union gave China 1,837 T-34-85 tanks, which also served with the North Koreans during the Korean War. The 1954 Operations Research Office report of tank versus tank combat in Korea stated that there had been 119 tank duels in the Korean War, including 38 US tanks lost against T-34s. A Sino-Soviet agreement saw the construction of a large manufacturing complex to deliver a copy of the T-54A, which became, until the 2000s, the Chinese main battle tank, or MBT. When relations soured between the two communist superpowers, China resorted to the latter tactic to acquire new technology for enhancement. This can plainly be seen during the Sino-Soviet border conflict in 1969, when a key battle took place on Zhenbao Island. After the Chinese essentially drew first blood, killing 59 soldiers with the initial airstrike, 4 of the brand new T-62 MBTs were sent to deal with Chinese patrols on the island. According to available records, one of these vehicles was hit and never recovered due to accurate Chinese artillery fire. The acquisition proved instrumental in allowing the Chinese to reverse engineer the latest Soviet technology and devise the next generation of MBTs, the Type 69-79. In 1985, China started to gain enough traction to make tanks like the Type 85 with the assistance of Norinco, inspired by the T-72, as a few ex-Iraqi ones captured by Iran were purchased by China for examination. It was the first second-generation Chinese tank. It still fell short of expectations when held up to most other Western tanks though. This attempt to upgrade the Type 80 by increasing its protection was ultimately a failure, with production stopping by 1995. Moving on to IFVs, it would serve as a discussion to address the Type 86, a rip-off of the Soviet BMP-1. This proved to be a more profitable venture. Many were exported and several variants were also produced. China produced an estimated 3,000-plus Type 86s, about 1,000 were enlisted as of 2009. The Type 86A, the amphibious version of the aforementioned vehicle, has a few practical problems, which is one of the key concerns facing all Chinese IFVs to this very day. And it's an obstacle that the country will have to circumvent if they have any hopes of achieving their ultimate goal. This was yet another example of China's reliance on foreign innovation, proving that the country still required outside references to produce effective machinery. Additionally, with strained relations between China and the West, there is little hope for licensing agreements that would help them create tanks capable of meeting optimal standards. This, of course, in conjunction with foreign interests, prevents them from putting an end to a conflict that has now lasted for almost a century. You probably know what we're referring to here. What lies at the heart of many of China's more recent military investments is the increased tensions with Taiwan. Originally, the island was passed from the Japanese over to China at the end of World War II and became part of the Republic on October 25, 1945. Although relations were positive at the start, they started to wobble when leaders like Chen Yi began treating the Taiwanese as outsiders, people corrupted by Japanese culture and policy. Chen hailed from Fujian province and could speak both Minnan Taiwanese and Japanese. He refused to do so, however, believing that the Taiwanese should learn Mandarin, which many of them found difficult. Taiwan, conversely, felt that the mainlanders were carpetbaggers who were incapable of understanding the society they had built. A riot broke out in 1947, and the following civil unrest was met with extreme violence. Mao Zedong then sent over forces and regained control in 1949. The US gave Taiwan the cold shoulder while these events took place, but the New World superpower changed its tune at the start of the Korean War in 1950. US President Harry S. Truman sent the US 7th Fleet to the Taiwan Strait to prevent an invasion of the island by communist armies from the mainland. Taiwan would be isolated under martial law until 1987. By then, they had become a relatively independent state whose identity, though close to China traditionally, began drifting away to form its own government policies and economic systems. The following decades would see a cyclical rise and fall in China-Taiwan diplomacy. At the moment, analysts are seeing a downward trend following Taiwan's recent economic successes. Indeed, in 2020, for the first time in some 30 years, Taiwan's annual economic growth, a roughly 3% increase in GDP, was greater than that of China. With recent gains, Taiwan increased its defense spending to nearly $17 billion in 2022. The US has become progressively more and more invested in Taiwanese security efforts, contributing $750 million in arms sales. The election of Lai Ching-te as president has only widened the gap between the two countries. Prior to the elections, China had labeled Lai as a destroyer of peace because of his ideological commitment to Taiwanese sovereignty. This added strain because China has long publicized its One China mission. Lai has also fired back at accusations stating that the presidential election results represented a victory for the community of democracies and that in the contest between democracy and authoritarianism, Taiwan had chosen to stand on the side of democracy. One could argue that a possible Chinese invasion is still off the table, but recent increased spending, along with China's massive new navy, suggests that conflict is still on the horizon. A series of new Chinese inventions, as well as inexplicable expansion in every branch of the military, continues to send troubling signals to the Western world. Which brings us to the most notable statement China has made in the realm of land-based firepower to date, the new VN-20. First debuted as a seemingly silly tabletop model at a 2015 arms show in the United Arab Emirates, the VN-20 seemed like an adventurous toy destined to be tossed in a nearby landfill. It was like something a G.I. Joe villain would drive after painting it Cobra red. However, in typical Chinese fashion, a prototype was prominently displayed in the middle of a 2022 air show. It wasn't fully fleshed out just yet, but it made the world take it a little more seriously. The logic behind encouraging such a project stems from a model called the VT-4 MBT, a tank that has made its way into the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. It's praised for its chassis, capable of handling large loads. This adaptation has been applied to the VN-20, along with the 6 road wheels on either side of the hull. Reports state, what Norinco did to build its heavy-duty IFV was employ the same tank chassis and put a new hull on top of it. The resulting VN-20 has the engine relocated to the front of the hull, where its exhaust ports are on the right side. Apparently, this leaves ample room for a sizable weapon station. The technology will prove to be essential for the VN-20 as its weight surpasses any known competitors at 50 tons. This begs the question, what makes this lumbering Goliath so heavy? For starters, the VN-20 stands with a length of 7 meters, a width of 3.5 meters, and a height of 2.4 meters. For the layman, just know that's a whole lot of metal. Next, we have the IFV's armaments. The VN-20 possesses 7 total, considerably more than what you'll see anywhere across the map. People are quick to point out that other IFVs carry around 3. For the VN-20, these include stacked cannons, with the primary being the 100mm main gun, assisted by a coaxial 30mm cannon, the 2 HJ-12E anti-tank missile launcher systems, and 2 RC heavy machine guns. There are 2 large fuel barrels accompanying the IFV's arsenal above the hydraulic ramp, because this beast is going to require a lot of juice. The next part of the kit that adds so much weight, as expected, is the VN-20's armor. This part of the build is made up of 3 parts: standard plating, explosive reactive armor, and slat armor. According to available sources, this is where the money is. This slat is designed to withstand explosive projectiles like the RPG with ease. The VN-20 is powered by a 1,300 horsepower diesel engine. Unfortunately, all we know for now is that the power source here is massive, but the specifics behind its construction remain largely unknown. So why all of these bells and whistles? What can this actually do? Well, it has room for 3 soldiers to operate weapon systems, along with 6 dismounted infantry soldiers that can be released from the back during an assault. It can also reportedly take a lot of heat, with ballistic protection level 6 Stanag 4569 against the firing of 30mm APF SDS. Its stacked cannons are stacked for a reason, providing enough firepower to push through a defensive line full of trenches. This seems like overkill, but firepower like this is quite necessary when fighting an entrenched defense. There really is no other option than to blast your way through the line. If this cannon system actually works, it would be a major asset when confronting a heavily fortified line. The 2 RC heavy machine guns on the tank's rear ensure that there will be no issues if there is an urban attack. These machine guns look like something out of a Bond film, and the internet has been on fire ever since images were released to the public. It's also why Taiwan is a part of this discussion. 80% of the population has been effectively urbanized, so this setup might just indicate that China is working on vehicles capable of withstanding Taiwan's fortified city environment. When it comes to mobility, the VN-20 can potentially climb 60% of slopes and vertical obstacles up to 1.2 meters, along with the ability to cross a 2.7 meter long trench. This brings it up to the quality standards seen among Western IFVs. Finally, its guided missile system appears to have a maximum range of 2,000 to 4,000 meters, depending on the time of day it's used. Depending on who you ask, this huge IFV is either a major threat to security or a big waste of space. Some of the decisions made here have left experts scratching their heads. In truth, there are a fair number of issues with the VN20. Many of these arguably perpetuate the widespread stereotypes revolving around Chinese weapons manufacturing. Before we move on, it's time to bring a number of these issues to light. From top to bottom, let's start with the dimensions of the VN20. Its size alone can be an issue in close combat scenarios. Its mobility is impressive for an IFV of its size, but that doesn't mean you're going to get out of a sticky situation if you find yourself surrounded. War is anything but predictable, and there are plenty of ways to get stuck between a rock and a hard place. This is where one would start to abandon ship, which is where things become even more complicated. We must talk about the placement of the two RC heavy machine guns specifically. If the 6 dismounted infantry soldiers are forced to make a quick exit, it will probably get a little messy. Exiting a tank is often a death sentence anyway, but in the rare instance where there's room to flee, escaping or casually exiting the VN20 has some major concerns. Aside from the deafening fire on each side of the hydraulic pump, there is a high possibility that those two large diesel tanks are now leaking profusely. Not exactly the perfect climate for soldiers needing to run for cover. Bullets fly everywhere. You'd have to be pretty lucky to avoid damage to these reserves. This was one of the primary concerns expressed when the final product was revealed to the public. According to some, this part of the build could be a preemptive psychological move, meaning that a difficult exit may motivate the tank operators to stay in the fight, making them fear running into combat deaf, blind, and soaked in diesel fuel. Honestly, this seems a bit far-fetched, but it wouldn't be the first time communist designs prevented the possibility of fleeing. Next, there's the anti-tank missile launcher, which analysts say most closely resembles the HJ-12E. It will prove to be a sufficient bunker buster with a top attack pattern, however, this delay could be a weak spot if confronted with proper defenses. Countermeasures against ATGMs include newer armor such as spaced, perforated, composite, or explosive reactive armor, jammers like the Russian Shatora, active protection systems like the Israeli Trophy and the Russian Arena, and other methods. Lastly, and perhaps the most obvious obstacle, is the armor and weight the VN20 must carry into battle. Level 6 Stanag sounds like a fantastic perk when facing a shaped-charge warhead, but it's a devastating problem for suspension and general mobility. Differing terrain could cripple the VN20, and this slat armor might have to be significantly reduced in the coming years, as it probably wouldn't be practical for less predictable invasions. Plus, even though little is known about the IFV engine, most analysts are quick to point out that it doesn't seem to be a reliable source of power for moving so much weight around for prolonged periods of time. If the VN20 were put out into the field today, it could look more like a deadly NASCAR race, where mechanics would be forced to make repairs throughout each journey. One can't help but think about the German Tiger tank, which struck fear into the hearts of defending armies. It was a powerful product of advanced engineering, but its weight dragged it into the Russian mud, while its underpowered Maybach engine struggled to push its mass through the unforgiving eastern wilderness it had to traverse. Along with this weakness in the tank itself, as briefly referenced in the bureaucratic evolution of the Chinese military, there are a number of elements to address when it comes to the systems meant to supply the necessary manpower and materials capable of mass-producing the largest IFV China has ever designed. In contrast to the West, there is very little standing in the way of extreme projects in countries like China. Most observers of the Chinese Communist Party's recent 20th National Congress agreed on at least one top takeaway. General Secretary Xi Jinping's power is at an all-time high, allowing him to dominate personnel appointments in the top leadership. Even before Xi, there has been a long tradition of unilateral decision-making under the guise of democratic symbolism and parlance. It muddies the waters quite a bit, putting outsiders who normally can make solid geopolitical predictions in a position where all they can do is speculate. The only key difference is that recent decades have seen the rise of capitalistic conglomerates given an almost libertarian edge with government-approved monopolies. This can be seen in many different industries across China, especially in the military. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI arms industry database, at least 4 of China's primary arms companies ranked among the world's top 25 in 2019 based on the value of arms sales. They include Aviation Industry Corporation of China, or AVIC, China Electronics Technology Group Corporation, or CETC, China North Industries Group Corporation, or Norinco, and China South Industries Group Corporation, or GSGC. which ranked 6th, 8th, 9th, and 24th, respectively. Today, we'll just be discussing Norinco, a business established in Beijing in 1980 and the major investor responsible for the VN20. Norinco rivals two key military manufacturing companies in the West, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, raking in about $71 billion each year. With record-breaking revenue and unrestricted innovation, this gives Norinco unmatched flexibility. It should be noted, however, that Norinco is far from being a one-trick pony. The company promotes the commercialization and industrialization of military technology and concentrates resources on developing advanced manufacturing sectors such as auto parts, engineering machinery and equipment, railway products, petrochemical, special chemical, civil explosion, photoelectric information, Baidu applications, intelligent manufacturing, emergency, and modern service sectors such as trade circulation, engineering technology management, and financial services. This is what really separates the company from most of the others mentioned on the list. Beginning with the basics, a lack of competition is rarely a recipe for success. With no real competitors, Norinco builds whatever it wants, but that also means nobody is present to challenge the newest idea. History has shown us time and again that a domestic race to the top is just as, if not more important, as state versus state. The arms industry has always thrived off of a healthy rivalry. That's what makes China's business model so ironic. The country always gives way too much power to a single entity, rendering the rest of the government and privatized businesses to twiddle their thumbs without license to challenge the status quo. Without leadership approval, projects are often neglected, so even the more influential groups hesitate to make anything new. IP protections are also a factor. Even if a company successfully makes a product that works, there's little in place to ensure that they can profit from their creativity in the future. Plus, Norinco has recently been placed in the hot seat for its corrupt business dealings, trading with Russia during one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. With the way China's government functions, there is little judicial oversight, and any inquiries made will not be held to the transparency standards seen in countries like the United States. This is why it was important to highlight China's history leading up to recent events. It proves that the nation has a track record for oversight so ineffective that it borders on the theatrical. Until these weapons are tested on the battlefield, there's no way to prove whether or not these vehicles fulfill promises shared by the foreign press. There's one more thing to mention before bringing this assessment to a close. Is the VN20 a serious threat, or is it simply a publicity stunt that will never get off the ground? According to available information, the answer to this is just as complex as Chinese bureaucracy itself. The United Arab Emirates has reportedly shown interest in placing an order for a number of VN20s when manufacturing begins. This indicates that there will at least be a few roaming the desert in the next decade. That aside, there doesn't appear to be any signs of China building these for their own mounting war effort. Norinco definitely started making this IFV as a way of saying, look what we can do, but introducing the VN20 as the new kid on the block comes with some pretty serious obstacles. For one, China is far from being a leader in the world of precision manufacturing. In fact, for the most part, they are incapable of achieving the bare minimum in this space. While most Western countries have moved on to using sophisticated 3D printing and meticulous crafting tech, China still imports about 71% of their engines and aircraft from better-equipped neighbors. This doesn't necessarily mean that China can't evolve in the coming years, but they usually outsource labor to avoid the necessary expenses. If China hypothetically fell into a global war with the West, the trade linking them to the developed world would be severed, and they would find themselves scrambling to catch up with systems that eclipsed them decades ago. President Xi has effectively wiped out all of those capable of challenging him, but this decision has simultaneously poisoned the well. Nobody with proper delegation skills is left to properly turn the tide if such an occasion should arise. This means that the mass production of the VN20 is not only unattainable without immense change, but is utterly ridiculous without considerable backing and resources. This leaves one more possibility. China could work with Norinco to export the VN20 to foreign militaries. Many highlight the fact that this is also a futile gesture, as most of China's international consumers are economically stagnant. And yet this might work to their advantage. If you take a look at China's Belt and Road project, they have no problem using debt to expand overseas. A number of African countries are slowly morphing into surveillance states, surrendering their unmined resources in return for debt forgiveness. Upon further inspection, this can be another way of ensuring that they strengthen their position on the African continent, arming governments that have sworn fealty in return for infrastructural improvements. It might just be a theory, but it's currently one of the only avenues China can take if they wish to make Norinco's new monster truly profitable. Whatever the case, given the history of China and its military, the VN-20 stands as an embodiment of a century-long quest to make themselves known, as well as prove to the world that they have the capacity to compete with the United States and its allies. It acts as the modern equivalent of a war elephant, large and destructive enough to intimidate the less versed opponent, but ultimately incapable of causing serious damage when confronted by an experienced foe. Perhaps that's the point. Only time will tell if the VN-20 is a laughable conversation piece or a weapon that will evolve into something truly worth fearing. Now go check out why China's new stealth fighter sucks, or click this other video instead.